Guys, last week obviously we went pretty fast, and we only covered 11 verses, or 11 chapters. I'm sorry, 11 chapters. And this week we're going to do 39 chapters. Now the difference, of course, is last week we covered 2,000 years of history, of Bible history. This year we're going to cover just over 300 years. So while the number of chapters, as we talked last year or last week, that God associates with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is a 300 years, but it's 39 chapters where he covered 2,000 years in only 11 chapters. So we'll go ahead and go through this. As we talked last week, we said for every book we go through, we're going to find a one-word theme that the whole book actually talks about. And I said last week that there's a lot of different words that we could have used for the book of Genesis. Genesis means beginning, the origin of a lot of things. And we went through the list of what it was an origin for. But I chose promise as God's promises. Today, we're going to see these promises of last week because the first 11 chapters, God makes a lot of promises to mankind. But in 12 through 50, he changes those promises and seals them with covenants. So we're going to look at how these promises start solidifying and being given to mankind as a covenant, which is a contract. The covenant's just a contract. So we're going to see the promises transition into the covenant. Like we said in overview, we went through the first four land. Last week I said, let's think of Genesis as a town. And we have 8 landmarks that we're going to try to hit. 4 this week and 4 next week. And we hit these 4 landmarks last week. And then my analogy kind of broke down in this because these last 4 landmarks we're going to go to has a lot of landmarks inside of them. So I'm thinking, okay, let me back out of this. Let's take this as Genesis as a country, and each chapter is a state, and inside each state has landmarks. So anyway, my analogy broke down a lot. So we're going to cover Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and the promises that God makes in the beginning during chapter 1 and 2 are transferred to Abram, who becomes Abraham. And then those, as we go through these people here, we'll see God reiterating the same promises to his son Isaac, the same promises to his son Jacob, and then eventually his same promises to his son Joseph. We're following the lineage. Remember last week after the flood and then the Tower of Babel, where they did not disperse and populate the earth like they were told to, God dispersed them. So this is where we find ourselves as we pick up on Adam. The Tower of Babel has occurred. God confuses their languages. They spread and populate the world like they were told to. And now God is going to choose a people group to deliver his love message through. Okay? The Jews were not, or Abraham himself was not a miraculous man. He makes lots of mistakes, as we're going to see as we study this. But God, through his love and mercy for mankind, chooses a people group, not because they're special. God makes them special. What makes us special? Christ. The blood of Jesus Christ is what makes us different. We're born again. We're different. But God chooses Abram. We're going to see that as we go through here. I did want to we looked at this a little bit. These are the 7 different dispensations. Last week, we zoomed through 2,000 of them, and that goes through the first 3. We made it through innocence, conscience, and civil government. We're landing right now on the promises, the 4th dispensation. Now remember, these first 3 dispensations were 2,000 years of history, and God went through these 3 dispensations. The remaining 39 chapters camp out and stay on the 4th dispensation, the promises to Abraham. So, because as I said, what the remaining part of Genesis is going to do is it's going to solidify God's first promise. Remember when he, in first, so these are the 8 covenants. Let's talk about it. The Edenic covenant, which was the garden, the Adamic covenant, the Noetic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Palestinian covenant. Some people have a problem with that one. It's called Palestinian or land covenant, and I could get into, just to let you know, on the Palestinian covenant, who were the first people called Palestinian people? Any idea? the Jewish people. The Jewish people were called Palestinian. They were not only the first. When do you think they stopped being called the Palestinian people? 1948. If you'd have checked any Jewish passport in 1947, after World War II, and 45, 46, you would have found on their passport, it says Palestinian. They were the Palestinian people. In 1948, when they became their own country, became Israel, one of the first things they did is they changed all their passports, reissued them, and they were called Israeli passports. So anyway, so when this covenant was made, the Palestinian was interchangeable with Jewish people, Hebrew people. And you got the Davidic covenant, which is the kingly covenant, and then the new covenant, which we are under, the cross, the grace. So we're going to go, if each one of these covenants have, just like each book, you have a theme word for each covenant that God's made. And remember, these are covenants that God's made with mankind. And the Edenic covenant is the one that he placed Adam and Eve in the garden, and the theme word is to rule. Adam was given dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock, the wild animals. He was given dominion over all of that. What happened? They sinned. They ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The only commandment that they were told not to do at the time, they did. At the fall, Adam lost dominion over the world. So God gave Adam and Eve dominion over the world, to rule over the world, and his initial plan, knowing man would fail it, was for them to populate through a perfect, unsinned world. When Adam sinned, what happened to the dominion? Who did the dominion revert back to God? No. We're told in the Bible, Satan, who tricked Eve and Adam, got dominion. So, you think about the wandering in the wilderness. Jesus wandered his 40 days of wandering in the wilderness. Satan tempted him, and he said, all these kingdoms I'll give to you if you'll only bow down to me. Well, Jesus didn't say, you don't have authority to give me those kingdoms. Those are my Father's kingdoms. No, he didn't. He fought Satan off with Scripture, but Jesus clearly understood that Adam lost dominion to Satan, and Satan is still the father of this world, the God, little g of this world. The Bible explained him throughout the Bible that Satan is the God, little g of this world. I have this question asked to me all the time. Why does God let horrible things happen to the people? And that's a deep answer. That's all. No one can fully answer that question. But we have to remember, when Adam lost dominion, Satan's had it ever since. Now, the good news is God's going to take it back. If we looked at those dispensations at the end of the millennial kingdom, God, through the 70th week of Daniel, takes dominion away from Satan and gets back into control, and then has the millennial kingdom. So while Satan's currently in control of this world, he causes a lot of chaos. He doesn't cause the only chaos. We actually have three enemies. We have Satan and his demonic hordes. They are probably the least of our, well, not the least. If I'm having a problem, that's not the first place I look. I don't look for Satan under the rock everywhere. We live in a fallen world. We have a world system that we live in. This world system also has its problems of its own. It's anti-Christian. This world is not pro-Christian. It's anti-Christian. That's enemy number two. But your biggest enemy, our biggest enemy, is our sin nature, ourselves, our own decisions. We make bad decisions in life because when we get to decisions, you pray about it and you have two choices. And we're going to see these choices play out where mankind through the centuries or millennial have made wrong choices. But we have a choice. God has a perfect choice for you, and we have a fleshly choice. And we make bad choices. Now, God doesn't send a lightning bolt down when you make a bad choice, right? But he deals with your choice you made, and you move up in life, and you make another choice. Think about in your life all the whys that you've come to in the road, and you could go right or you can go left. How many times did you go the wrong way? And each time you do, it's splinters and splinters. I can't think of all the mistakes in my life I've made, and I shudder to think that God would open my eyes and let me see where I would have been if every choice in my life would have been godly choices. But anyway, so we get through, in the Edenic covenant, after the fall, we see the serpent, that we get the first, we talked about it last week, where the proto-evangelium, that's the first place in the Bible. In chapter 2 of the Bible, God gives the first glimpse of a promised Savior that's to come. And it's in the proto-evangelium. It's in the curse of the serpent. When he gives the curse of the serpent, he actually says that, the serpent will bruise the heel of the seed of a woman, and the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. And that's happened. We saw that. The bruise of the heel was when Jesus Christ went to the cross, and Satan must have thought, I did it, I won, And then, of course, 3 days later, Jesus rises from the dead and defeats feet. That's the crushing the head of the serpent. Now, it's already been done, and it's just playing out now. Now it's playing out in our life. And then we had the Noahic covenant with the flood, and then that gets us to the Abrahamic covenant. So I wanted to show this next slide because just to frame your mind, as we start stepping through the Bible, lots of times we think there's so many generations, and there's actually 8 or 9 generations between Shem. I want you to notice Noah and then Shem. Shem in particular. Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Japheth, and Shem. We're going to follow Shem's lineage because he's the lineage to the Christ, to the promised Messiah. So we're not going to look at the other 2 because we don't have time to do that. But I want you to notice Shem, and I can't see that, lived
600.
600. Not 6. I mean, when did he die? Over to the far right of his
2158.
And when did Abraham die?
Abraham, where was that? 2123.
2123. Abraham died before Shem. Abraham's whole life was alive, born, went through all the struggles we're going to look at, and Shem is still alive. You had access to someone who was on both sides of the flood. I can't imagine these people, all these generations of Shem going to Shem. How was it like before the flood? How evil was it before the flood? What did God tell you guys? Why? Well, how scared? I mean, all the questions you would have about the animals, the ark, and God's judgment on the world, the rainbow, all that. It was firsthand. Abraham could have had that information, firsthand knowledge from Shem, who went through it, lived through it. So while there's hundreds of years, but because Shem lived so long, because he was pre-flood, he actually was alive during Abraham. So when we're thinking about this stuff we're going to go over, think about that. Think about Shem still alive, and a lot of this information could have come firsthand from Shem. So Abraham is the father of all who believe. And we're going to be going through some statements that are made, and it says Abraham was righteous. And when the Old Testament's talking about someone being righteous, what the Old Testament is talking about, the Hebrew word that's used is they were still believing in the God who created the heavens and the earth. So it wasn't that they were sinless, because they sinned, right? We're going to see they sinned a lot, but God still considered them righteous. They weren't righteous because of their condition. They were righteous because they believed the promises of God who made them to him. That's what made them righteous. When we get over to the New Testament, or if you're studying the New Testament, you're going to come across words in Greek now that say, no, none are righteous, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, right? We know that's a different word, and that's sinless. So when the New Testament talks about, and that's the problem with English words, once again, we've talked about that. English words don't always tell us the full meaning behind the Hebrew or the Greek word. And so that's not a contradiction. God didn't say now in the New Testament, he's talking about righteousness. You have to be righteous. You have to be sinless to be righteous. And then in the Old Testament, clearly they weren't sinless. There's 2 different meanings behind the words that are used. But Abraham is the father of all who believe. In the New Testament, it says that. It says in Romans 4, it says, and he received circumcision as a sign, a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith before he was still uncircumcised. And the New Testament, Paul in particular, goes to great lengths to show that Abraham's faith was credited him as righteousness because he believed. And then he ties that bridge over to us saying, Abraham believed that before the sign that God made was circumcision. So he was the father of the faith of the uncircumcised, which are Gentiles, and the circumcised, which are Jews, saying Abraham is the father of both Jews and Gentiles. Basically, there's a whole more in-depth story we can dig out here, but because this is an overview, it's an overview. Galatians 4, chapter 3, great chapter to read because Paul goes into great lengths through the whole chapter to explain this message that he's talking about. Hebrews, of course, chapter 11 is the heroes of faith, or the heroes of faith. That's a list of all the heroes, and Abraham's mentioned in that. So I wanted to show you this to kind of frame you guys up on where Abraham came from, what God, the promises he made. So over here to the left, the red line to the, your right, that's Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is modern day Iraq and Turkey up at the top. So all of this down here is Iraq, modern day Iraq, and this is Turkey. So Abraham's living in Ur. He's living with his father. His father historically is believed to have been an idol maker. Ur was a polytheistic city. They believed in many, many gods, right? And God's going to call him out of that to the one true God. And Abraham, or Abram at the time, will be the first will be called out as a monotheistic. God is the only God. There's not lots of gods. There's one true God. So Abraham is living there. He has no children at the time. His name, Abram, at the time means exalted father. So you think about that. He is probably 60 years old at the time. He has a barren wife, and his name means exalted father. And God calls him out, and he makes 3 promises to him. The 3 promises that are made to Abraham and are passed to Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and in effect all of us, is I'm going to give you a promised land. I'm going to take you out of this land and give you a promised land. So that's promise number 1. Promise number 2 is I'm going to make you a father of great nations, or of a great nation. And 3, my promise to you is the seed of the promised Savior, Messiah, will come through you. So God just took all these people groups that we saw on the Table of Nations, and he shrinks it down to Abram. And he says, I promise you that I'm going to take you out of here. I'm going to give you this promised land. I'm going to make you a father of a great nation, and I'm going to promise you the promised Messiah that I promised in chapter 2 of Genesis is going to come through you. So that's where we're at. So Abraham started up. First off, he leaves. God told him to leave your family, leave your town, and go to a land I'm going to show you. He didn't say what land yet. He just said where I'm going to show you. Did Abraham follow what God said? So he left. But guess what? He left with his father, and he left with his father's whole family, and he left with his nephew Lot. Abraham's father had 3 sons. One of them died. Lot is a nephew of Abraham. His brother passed away. Abraham kind of adopts him. But God told him to leave his family and his land and go to a promised land. And he does. He leaves, but he takes his whole family with him, basically. His father's still, for lack of a better word, the chieftain, the head family member of all the clan, And so, but they head up here. Notice some of these Babylon. Last week I mistakenly said that was in Syria. Tony should have caught me. No, I'm sorry. It's in Iraq. And then Nineveh. We know about Nineveh because Jonah later on stories, he is called to go preach to Nineveh. And then Haran. We stop in Haran. Except there has been a study, a caravan moving at an average pace should go from Ur down to Shechem, which is where they end up down here. 1 year. It's a 1-year journey in a caravan. Did it take them 1 year? Did it take them 2 years? 4 years? 10 years. Why did it take them 10 years? They made it to Haran, and they stayed there until Abraham's father died. And then 10 years later, when Abraham's now 75, God calls him again because they're camped there for 10 years. These are approximate years. It could have been 9, 11, 8. I don't. But he's at 75 now. And God calls him again to go down. This time, he leaves his father passed away. He leaves his whole family, his whole father's family, and goes down. But he takes one. He takes Lot and his family. So he's still God called him out to leave his family, leave his town. He kind of does, but he brings Lot. Decisions we make have consequences. And we're going to see decision after decision that Abraham makes, and he made them probably out of love, right? I mean, the motivation of Abraham's decisions are good. They're just not what God told him to do. And God sees farther than we see into the future. So when God tells us to do something, we probably should do it because we don't know the consequences of doing it our way is going to have. always say, I don't want to move ahead of God and have an Ishmael. We'll get to that in a couple more chapters. So anyway, so Abraham now comes down to the promised land. He's 75 years old. He's in the promised land. And does he find, what is the description of the promised land? Land flowing with milk and honey. Now he finds a drought. He's in the promised land, and now there's a drought. So he makes a choice, and he goes to Egypt because Egypt has the Nile, and it's a large river base that irrigates this whole area. So it was pretty traditional in the time when people had drought years, they would go to Egypt. We're going to see that again too. That's whole Joseph's whole story at the end. But so Abraham goes down there. He makes his first mistake, not his first mistake. He makes his first mistake of this kind. He's afraid that he's going to go to Egypt, and Sarah's a beautiful woman, and they're going to kill him and take his wife. So he tells Sarah, hey, tell everybody you're my sister. Now, he's not outright lying because she's his half-sister, but tell everybody you're my sister. So she does as her husband asks. She goes down there, and the Pharaoh sees her. It catches his eye and says, get her. And he takes Sarai at the time, Sarah. I apologize if I use Abram, Sarai, and Sarah interchangeable. I should wait until God changes the name to use them, but have it. So he goes down to Egypt, and Pharaoh takes him. Well, God puts a plague on Pharaoh, puts a plague on his whole family, and Pharaoh figures out why. I think it's a dream. He goes back in and says, why would you do this to me? And of course, and Abraham tells him, he goes, because I was afraid for my life. I thought you guys would kill me and take my wife anyway. And he goes, okay. So Pharaoh makes it right. And to Pharaoh, God kept Pharaoh from, that's the word I'm looking for, doing wrong to Sarai. So, but guess what? God blesses Abram and Sarah and has Pharaoh give them wealth. And they leave and go back to the promised land with a tremendous amount of wealth. So in that interaction, even though you can see blunder after blunder, which is helpful for us guys, I like that the Bible shows us that our forefathers, patriarchs, whatever you want to call them, aren't perfect. If every one of the heroes of the Bible led perfect lives, we'd say, I can't do this. There's no way I can do it. But they make mistake after mistake after mistake, and God blesses them anyway.
How long were they, what period of time were they there before they took with their wealth and moved on?
So it wasn't that long because he's 75 when he came down. The drought forced him down there, and he's 76. So it might have been like a year's type of thing. And then God sends him back up. So now he's in the promised land, and God's taking care of him. In fact, God's blessing him so much. Remember, he's got Lot with him still. In order to speed through this, I started putting 2 chapters aside, hoping to get through all the chapters. So we'll see. So the top slide is one we're going to focus on first. And so they were being blessed. Lot and Abraham both were being blessed. And they had a problem now. Their herdsmen and their flocks were fighting over water, over wells, and over grazing ground. So this is the story that sends Lot away, which he probably should have never been there. But anyway, so Abraham basically says to Lot, I tell you what, this is all Scott's paraphrasing, sorry. I tell you what, you look around and you pick any land you want, and whatever land you pick, I'll go the other way. I'll take the other land. Well, Lot's not an idiot. So he looks down and he looks at Sodom, the valley of Sodom, and it's plush. It's got a river feeding it. It's great grazing land, plenty of water. And so he says, I'm going to go that. And Abraham says, fine, you go that way, I'll go this way. Well, this way from the valley of Sodom is actually hilly, rocky, rough territory. So Abraham went that way, but God blessed Abraham anyway. So God blessed Abraham, even though the land was harsh. Now Sodom, of course, went to he ends up in Sodom and Gomorrah. We don't know all the details of how he picked his herd to go down there and have lush land and end up in the city anyway, but he did. That's where he is. Now in Genesis chapter 14, there's a very interesting story that the Bible throws in there, and the only reason this story is probably in there is because of Lot. There is 9 kings. There are 4 kings of the east, northeast, and then there's 4 kings of the south. And what happens is there's one powerful king. I'll probably butcher his name. Kedorlaomer? Kedorlaomer. Yeah,
And that one.
that king. He is ruling over all 9 of the kings, and the other 8 are paying him tribute. Every year they pay him for peace. So he basically controls all the territory of all 9 kings, his own plus the other 8. They did this for 12 years, the Bible says. On the 13 years, the 5 kings of the south said, forget this, we're not doing it anymore. They stopped paying it. So the king gathered the other 3 armies from the east, the north, and came down and won. There was a war. It's the first war, not conflict, but war the Bible mentions, okay? And it's of these 4 kings against these 5 kings. The 4 kings of the north or east win. And what do you do when you win a war? You take the plunder. Now, the reason this story here is probably in the Bible is one of the kings of the south that lost is Sodom. And that's Sodom and Gomorrah. And where's Lot? In Sodom and Gomorrah. So when the kings in the north took them, they took Lot and all of Lot's possessions. Word of this got to Abraham. And so Abraham was a quite large tribe at the time. And the Bible says he had 318 trained men. So obviously they knew there was trouble in the land, so they trained men. But these were still herdsmen, but they would train men. But he took 318 of his whole tribe, and he went up after Lot. And he defeats the 4 kings of the north. He defeats them, gets Lot, frees all of Lot's possessions, and takes Lot down. So that's probably the reason that this is in there is because Lot got swooped up in this war, that occurred. And God prompted Abraham to go get him, and he did. So he brings Lot back. The interesting story we're going to focus on, too, is on his journey back. So he went up there to this land, and he freed Lot. Now on his way back, this is a really interesting story. So in Genesis 14, it says, then Melchizedek, and we want to remember that name because it's going to become very important all throughout, even into the New Testament. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Interesting, communion, Lord's Supper, kind of interest. Brought out bread and wine. He was priest of the God Most High, and he blessed Abraham, saying, blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of the heavens and the earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. And then Abraham paid him a tithe, a tenth of everything. Who is this guy? There's 3 or 4 different possibilities that people think. One, they think he's Shem. You remember, Shem is still alive. Shem's like the senior person of everybody. So if they think Shem has settled in this town, Salem, and it's him. Nowhere is there any collaborative evidence of that. But if people do, if you go to a commentary, you can see that. They'll go point that out. I don't lean that way, but it's possible. The other one is he was just a local chieftain. He was a king who was the king of Salem and the priest for that town. And this is God used it as a foreshadowing of Christ Christ is our King of Kings and our high priest, right? The problem is, in the culture of the day, you never had a king and a priest. They were either kingly lineage or they had a priestly lineage. Even if the pagan priest, you never had pagan priests that worshiped all types of gods becoming a king. And you never had kings being priests. Even in Judaism, they don't, right? We have Levi, the 3rd son of Jacob. He's the priestly tribe where Aaron came out of and ends up being the priestly tribe. And Judah, the 4th son of Jacob, who becomes the kingly tribe. Judaism doesn't mix that either. You're either from the tribe of Judah and you're a line of the kings, or you're the tribe of Levi and you're a priestly line. But Jesus comes through the line of Judah as our King of Kings. But he ends up in the New Testament being explained, he's our high priest too. So he's both our king and our priest in the order of Melchizedek. And I say that to say the third option that a lot of people say is this is a Christophany. Christ, it appears, he's going to appear to Abram and Sarai when he changes their names before they destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's different times. He appears as a Christophany when Jacob wrestles with God. That's a Christophany. So this is a Christophany. That's a possibility. Others think it's an angel. I don't buy that. Once again, I don't see any collaborating evidence that he's Shem, and I don't see any collaborating evidence that he's an angel. In fact, there's things that contradict if they make him an angel. But anyway, those four things you'll find in commentaries. If you go read about this and study it, those it. So notice the name. So he's basically the king of Salem, which is Psalm 72 or 76 down here at the bottom shows Salem is actually Jerusalem. Jerusalem doesn't exist yet as a name. It's a town called Salem, eventually evolving into God's city, Jerusalem, Zion. And so his name, he is actually a king of Salem, and his name means king of righteousness. So all these things definitely point to Christ, right? Christ is king of righteousness. Christ is king of peace. Salem means peace. So very interesting. We could probably stay here and talk about it more. In Hebrews, this is what they say. So this will kind of solidify maybe a little more information that you can use. This Melchizedek, who was king of Salem and priest of God Most High, he met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also, king of Salem means king of peace. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. Remembering the Son of God, resembling, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. Resembling the Son of God, thank you, he remains a priest forever. So clearly the Bible shows this is a representation, whether it's a Christophany or a foreshadowing. It is definitely a picture of the promise coming of what Christ is going to do.
So it really means there's no record of a mother.
That's exactly the two ways you can do it. You can believe if you believe it's a Christophany, then of a man representing foreshadowing, then it's just there's no record of it. Christ has no beginning, no end. If you believe it's a Christophany, you're probably going to slant towards, no, there's no genealogy. There's no beginning, no end. So depending which silo you fall in, you're probably going to interpret that one way or another. But we're not going to go down that route.
Well, and the main thing too out of Hebrews is the significance that he's superior to the order of Levi because he's superior to Abram. And thus, when you're reasoning with the Jewish people, how can Jesus from Judah be the Christ?
Right.
Well, there's your answer right there.
Right. Yep. Yeah. In fact, the Hebrews is all about Christ is better than the temple. Christ is better than angels. Christ is better. It goes through the whole list. You're right. Okay. Chapter 15 gets us to a really weird, for us, a very weird situation because we don't cut animals in half and make a covenant or a contract. Hopefully not, yeah. But in their culture, it was a common thing. So they called it cutting a covenant. And not only in the Bible, but in the culture, what they would do if two people groups came together and they wanted to make a contract or a peace treaty or something like that, they would cut these animals in half, split them, and then join together and walk through the middle of them. And it would represent, if we break this covenant or promise that we have made with you, this is what will end up to us, what happening to us. So that's the premise of this, the culture of the day. That was how they solidified a contract together. Well, what God does is he has Abraham prepare this contract. He prepares this thing, but we're going to see in here God making conditional covenants and unconditional covenants, unilateral or bilateral. And this is going to be an unconditional, unilateral contract. He has Abraham set it up, but then he causes Abraham to go to a deep sleep. And God himself, through the fire, in a vision to Abraham, passes through this with Abraham not participating in it, showing that this covenant I'm going to make with you, Abraham, is a unilateral, unconditional covenant. Now, this is, once again, God's going to do this multiple times, reiterating what three things? That I'm going to give you promised land that I promised you, that I'm going to make you a father of many nations, and that the seed of the Savior, Messiah, is going to come through your lineage. Those are the three promises he makes again. This time, he takes it from a promise that was earlier on, and now it's a contract. And it's a unilateral, unconditional contract that God himself will make fulfill. No matter what you do. Now, there's going to be some conditionals when we get to Moses and Leviticus and stuff. But right now, this promise to Abraham's seed is unconditional. So some time goes by. We're not told how much. We get to the next chapter, chapter 16. And this is where I say, don't make an Ishmael. Don't make a mistake. Sarai is still barren. Abraham, the exalted father, has no kids still. So Sarai thinks, maybe God wants to bless you through my handmaid. So she comes up with this plan to give her Egyptian handmaid, Agar, to Abram, to bless him and so that his seed can be blessed. This is one of those whys in the road.
Yeah.
That they just made they made a decision of their own.
That sounds logical.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's not logical. And we get harsh on them, but we do it all the time. We don't know how often we get to a wine road and make a Scott Henry decision rather than a godly decision. But they make this decision. Well, what's the ramifications of this decision they made? We live with it today. So one, Abraham becomes the father of the three major monotheistic religions. Judaism in the middle there, which has been going on for 4,000 years. So, that's when this is. Judaism is a 4,000-year-old religion that was made under Abraham through Isaac. Christianity, 2,000 years at Pentecost, after the cross. The church started, and we have Christianity, 2,000 years. And Islam has been around for 1,400 years. So through Muhammad, and Muhammad traces his lineage through Ishmael up to Abraham. So Muhammad claims that Ishmael was the oldest, Abraham's his father, and so these are the three major monotheistic religions that have caused, think of all the hostility, the war, the hatred that has come even with these religions. Now, none of that is God. All of that is man, once again, making man decisions about their religion. But it is not just, so these are the three major religions that we're still paying for today, right? In the Middle East, the Middle East problem is just a big family feud. That's all it is. It's a family feud that has exploded into a global problem in the world. And it's going to have more eyeballs on it the closer we get to the end times. But they're not the only problems, too. If you see this map, I put this map in there. Notice some of these names. As you read through the Bible, you'll notice these names like the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites. These are people groups that they have went to war, conflict with throughout the Old Testament. They've been thorns in Israel's side. Well, these are also problems. The Edomites stand here, kingdom of Edomites, of Edom. That's Esau. We'll get to that story with Jacob and Esau, the brothers. The Moabites and the Ammonites. That's Lot when he is rescued before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They go up, leaving Sodom and Gomorrah, and the God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, and the two daughters thought that Lot was the only man left in the world. And so they get him drunk, they have kids, and their descendants become the Moabites and Ammonites. And so all of these people groups that we read through the Old Testament that are constantly are, once again, man-made decisions that were wrong outside of the will of God, and we still live with those problems today.
Ripple effect.
It is a ripple effect. Yep. Once it starts with the butterfly, the butterfly effect. So we get to 17. God's going to make another covenant. Remember, he's made a bunch of covenants, telling that he's unconditionally promised him to do what he did. Now, the circumcision promise is, he said, this is going to be the sign that you are my people, that I'm going to deliver this message to. So the joke goes, I don't know if I should say this, but my wife's gone, so now I can't do it. So Abraham's up there talking to God, and he goes, okay, let me get this straight. All these people around me that hate me get all this oil, and I got to cut off what?
Right, yeah.
But God chooses Abraham, and he says, this is the sign that, there's a deep study in circumcision, meaning discarding the flesh and the spirit. We don't have time to go into that, You should do a great study on what circumcision really means about getting rid of the flesh and walking in the spirit. We'll get to 18. We have this is a Christophany. There's an angel of the Lord and two angels. And the angel of the Lord is Jesus Christ prior to him becoming a man, right? That's what we call it a Christophany. Because him showing up resembling a man before he took on the body of a man. So he comes, and this is where he's going to change Abram's name to Abraham and Sarah's name to Sarai to Sarah. Actually, I was apologize. He did that up in the covenant with the circumcision. But he comes down there, and in this visit, he's going to tell them that Sarai, now Sarah, is going to have a child in a year. And she laughs, right? And it's kind of a funny interaction there. So they come there. Abraham gets to go and say, make some food for these guys. Let's wash their feet and prepare for visitors. We got visitors because they're in the middle of nowhere. And so they come in, and that's when he tells Abraham now, your wife Sarah is going to have a child in a year. She laughs, and Jesus asks Abraham, why did your wife laugh? And she heard it. She goes, I didn't laugh. And Jesus goes, yes, you did. And the funny thing is, Jesus' name says, you're going to call your son Isaac, and Isaac means laughter. The name Isaac in Hebrew means laughter. And that's the whole interaction with them, and that's why Jesus had him named Laughter. So these are the same two. Now, this story, if you read the rest of the story, after this interaction with Abraham, the other two angels go on to Sodom and Gomorrah. And Jesus tells Abraham, I'm going to go destroy. The evil has risen so much in Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm going to destroy it. And we have this interesting interaction in 18 here with Abraham and the angel of the Lord. And the interaction, it's funny because Abraham knows what's there, right? And God just told him, I'm going to go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham said, would you destroy that if there were 50 righteous people there? And Jesus said, no, I won't destroy it if there's 50 righteous. And then he becomes apologetic, and Abraham goes, what about 45? And Jesus says, no, I won't destroy it if there's 45 righteous people. And it goes on. Abraham then says, what about if there's 40? And I'm not doing it justice because the pleading and the apologetic attitude in Abraham is each time he requests another one, he goes from 50 to 45 to 40, then to 30, then to 20. When he goes into 10, he's really bending over backwards to apologize like he's, I'm sorry I have to ask you again, but what if there's 10 righteous? Would you destroy that? Sodom and Gomorrah. And he goes, no, I will not if there's 10 righteous. The question is, why didn't he go to 5? Why didn't he go to 1, right? So we don't know, but he stopped at 10. He was too embarrassed to go any
To go to 1.
Yeah, to go to 1. So, but you have to know he was thinking about.
He's like,
Lot,
but what about Lot? Yeah.
You know he was thinking about that. But he did not stop.
That's funny.
Yeah, so he stops at 10. So God goes down there, and there's 10. There are not 10 righteous people. Now remember, righteous does not mean sinless. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for righteous, it means there are not more than 10 people in this whole metroplex. Sodom and Gomorrah is like Dallas-Fort Worth. I mean, it's a large metroplex of people. And there's not 10 people in that metroplex that are believing in the God Most High and worshiping him. They have all gone to pagan worship. So that's why it's gotten so evil. So God, in his mercy, really, is going to take Lot and his family out of there. And we know the story. Actually, his 2 daughters were betrothed, and Lot went to the husbands of the betrothed men, and they didn't want to leave. So he had to leave the Israel. And they got to leave now. So he leaves with his daughter, his wife, and of course, on their way out, his wife turned around, Phillips. But that's when they end up in the high country. They saw the results of the destruction. Not just Sodom and Gomorrah, but a lot of surrounding towns were destroyed. The 2 women were thinking, we got to reconquer the world. I mean, we have no children, we have no men. That's when they did their mistake and got their father drunk, and they had sex with him, and they had two children. Both of them had a child in incest, who became trouble for Israel later on.
It was their father-in-law, right?
No,
Oh, okay.
no.
Who was a father-in-law?
I must be beaten about somebody else.
Yeah. No, yeah, it was a long.
There's somebody else.
Two daughters.
Her father-in-law, but I guess.
Huh.
Yeah, the eating.
Well, Tamar, for sure. Tamar and Judah. Tamar and Judah. Yeah. Hey, that's it. And we're gonna get there too.
But at least they wrote it down. They didn't delete.
Yeah, no. That,
Text.
that's what I'm impressed with the Bible about. No man would have wrote these. If I'm writing about lying,
And wouldn't have told that.
exactly, I would not. If I'm making up a god, I'm not making up all these mistakes and threading them throughout the Bible. I'm just not. Okay, so we won't stay on Abraham and Amalek, but remember when Abraham went down to Egypt and he had the mistake with Pharaoh where he tried to pass his wife off as his sister? He does it again. Now he has a contention over the well and the grazing land with King Amalek, and he basically goes there to negotiate, and he does not. He's afraid. Once again, he's afraid that they're going to kill him and take his wife. So he tells Sarah now, pass yourself. Tell him you're my sister.
Let's do this again.
Is do this again. And I did it. And they did it again. And guess what? Sarah caught his eye, Amalek's eye, and he took her. Now this time God protected Sarah again, and he gave him a dream and told him, if you take her as your wife, she's married. This is what's going to happen to you. And once again, he goes back to him, what the heck, guy? Why'd you do this to me? Why did you curse me? And once again, old Abraham makes out like a champ because Amalek gives Sarah a dowry and gives Abraham more money again. I mean,
He's got a good little scam going here. That
I do have to say, God is all-knowing, all-righteous. But I'm thinking, if you make bad behavior, if you reward bad behavior, kids are going to repeat bad behavior. Of course, this is show too. The good news is we don't know that he does this ever again, but he did it twice, and I think twice too many, 2 times too many. But anyway, so that's that story. They end up once the dream is over, they work out, they negotiate it, and they negotiate a treaty for their wells and the grazing land. Now we come to 21. And that's the birth of Isaac. So Abram becomes Abraham, and when God changed his name from Abram, exalted father, to Abraham, which makes it worse, father of many nations, and he still didn't have a kid when he did that, finally gets his kid. So at least he can live up to his name, Abram, right? Exalted father. He's got a kid. So Abraham and Sarah live happily ever after. No, of course not. They have kids. They have children problems. The first problem we see in chapter 21, you got Ishmael still, right? Ishmael was still through Hagar, and there was a lot of contention going on. The Bible describes all this contention that's going on. And Sarah says, hey, I have none of this shit. He's mistreating my son, blah, 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 blah. And Abraham feels obligated to both women. He has children through both women. He wants to protect both the children. But God, in a dream, tells Abraham, no, listen to your wife. Listen to your wife, Sarah, and send Hagar and Ishmael away. So Abraham does what God says, sends them away, and Hagar and Ishmael go out into the wilderness, and Hagar thinks she's going to die. She falls on the mercy of God, says, please save me, save my child. And God says, look, I've got you. And this is once again, Scott paraphrasing. In fact, I'm going to bless Ishmael. He's going to have 12 sons. Kind of reminds us of Jacob having 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Ishmael has 12 sons. The problem is Ishmael's 12 sons, they're part of the problem in the Middle East. I mean, once again, we see the Bible creating in decisions that were made that get compounded, and we're living with those ramifications.
I wonder why God did that.
His mercy, for Hagar,
It's opposing.
yeah.
It's an opposition.
It wasn't in time, right? They were living in Abraham as a monotheistic believer. They believed in God, right? At that time, they were in Abraham's household. He was probably circumcised because this is after the circumcision, and God and Abraham circumcised all people. So he was in that group, It's not until much, much later that Ishmael becomes the father of Islam. In fact, it's in 600 AD 600 years after the cross, that Muhammad has this dream and does all that. So his descendants do much later.
Yeah.
But he was actually probably a God-fearing, God-believing person, and God did not punish him for what God knew his descendants would do.
And one of the names of God is El Roi,
Yeah.
ROI. And the first time that name for God is in the Bible is when he meets with Hagar, because he sees her pain. So not,
Yeah, we unfortunately, with our retrospective, seeing what the problem that it caused, we can go back and say,
Yeah, hindsight's 2020.
yeah, God, why would you do that? And God knew that too, right? But he still dealt with the person in the moment that they were in. He doesn't deal them for what sin. I'm glad that I wasn't judged for sins that I have done, right? I mean, and that's kind of the same with that.
That's really good.
So the treaty of Beersheba, we're not going to go through this. There was a fight over the wells. They make a treaty. When Jesus meets the woman at the well, she references, oh, Abraham, the wells Abraham built. And so there was this treaty, and Abraham built wells all over the area for all the flocks and stuff. This is a very, very important. I wish we could spend a lot more time here, but I got to speed things up. Isaac, but what I want us to notice here, so Abraham finally got his son. He's got Isaac, okay? And no, Abraham has 14 chapters written about him. Isaac's only got one, really, 1.5 at most. So, but Abraham's now asked by God to sacrifice his one and only son. Let's just read it. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to a region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. So the interesting, I put the map there. Moriah is the same mountain range that Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, is on today. It's the same city of Jerusalem that Jesus was at. It's Solomon's temple was built there. Herod's temple was built there. This is Jerusalem. And guess what's just north of Jerusalem? Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. And it's the highest point out of the northern side of Jerusalem. When I taught this, when it took a year to do it, we went into great lengths about the parallels between Isaac and Jesus. I threw a few of them up here. Isaac and Jesus were miracle babies. Obviously, Jesus, the virgin birth. Isaac, his father was 100, his mother was 90 and barren. He was a miraculous birth. Jesus and Isaac were both miraculous births. God named both Jesus, said we were going to call him Jesus, Emmanuel. We were also going to call Isaac. He named Isaac. They both carried their own wood. Jesus carried his cross, and Isaac carried the bundle of wood that he was going to be sacrificed upon there. A lot of people think Isaac was like 12 years old. No, I believe, and this is Scott, but there's some biblical evidence to this, that Isaac was probably 33. I think he was the same age Jesus was when Jesus went to the cross. He was He was set up to be crucified on the same spot on Golgotha that Jesus was crucified on. Even before this was called Jerusalem, it was still Salem, or the Mount of Moriah. There was no, Jerusalem temple or city there anymore. And so they both were willing to go. In fact, Jesus went willingly to the cross. Isaac went willingly because his father asked him to go. They were both loved by their father. There's more, but the comparisons and the similarities to the symbolism of Jacob being asked to sacrifice his son, and he went up there. Of course, God provided a substitutionary death, and Jesus is our substitutionary death. So good to dig in further on this, guys. It's a great story there. So while Isaac doesn't have a lot of chapters, it's some amazing evidence in there. Hebrews 11 says, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he received Isaac back from the dead. And of course, that goes to Jesus dying for 3 days. This journey took 2 to 3 days to do it. So
He's bringing logic into it. Like, well, maybe if I do kill him, then he'll bring him back.
Yeah, you got to kill your son, your one and only son that God promised. So you got to come up with these logics saying, but God must. Anyway, your father Abraham rejoiced. So this is another thing when in the New Testament where the Pharisees and stuff were talking to Jesus, and he basically said, "Look, your father rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it, and he was glad." And they said, "You're not yet 50 years old." They said to him, "And you have seen Abraham?" Well, obviously, they made Jesus a man. They didn't understand who Jesus really was. Another whole thing. The death of Sarah. We're moving on. I'm not going to go through this because of time. I want to get to Joseph. Abraham bought land. This is the first purchased land in the Promised Land. God gave him that land, but he didn't own it yet, right? But he purchased this cave to bury Sarah, and it becomes an important cave to all the patriarchs. Abraham gets buried there. Joseph wants to go back there. Isaac gets buried there. A lot of the patriarchs get brought back and buried in this land. And not only, we know that Israel got the land back in 1948, but the Arabs owned a lot of that land. When Israel was, by the Balfour Declaration and others, were given the land after World War II in 1948, Arabs still own stuff. The Jews bought that. They bought with cash. In fact, the stories go in the newspapers, the Arabs made fun of them. They thought they were so stupid. They were buying swampland and Rocky for exorbitant prices. The Arabs thought, oh man, they're just dumb. Well, look what Israel's turned into. God's blessed it. A lot of history there. The wife for Isaac, Abraham sends his servant back to the homeland. Haran becomes a very important place. That's where his father died, his family left. So they send him up. We get Rebecca. Rebecca is brought back down for Isaac's wife. Just the death of Abraham is in 25. Just to let you know, the Bible says that both Isaac and Ishmael buried him, which just makes us think. At the time, we know the problem and the contention between Isaac's descendants and Ishmael's descendants. But obviously they had some amenable relationship back in this day when Abraham was still living, because they buried their father together, which is natural, right? You would think that. But the Bible explicitly says that, so that's God's promise. So now now in chapter 26, God passes that same promises he made to Abraham. He passes it to Isaac. I'm going to move faster because I do want to get to Joseph. We have the whole story of Isaac having two boys, two twins, right? You got Jacob and Esau. Esau's the firstborn, and Jacob's the heel catcher. He's born with his hand grabbing the heel of Esau, and he's the younger. And we have this contention between them. Esau is a man's man. He's a hunter. He brings home the food and the deer and whatever. And then Jacob is more of a mama's boy, for lack of a better word. He's at home fixing stew and stuff like that. So we have the story. There's two things. Esau, being the oldest, traditionally, he would get not only the blessing, but he'd get the promise as well. Remember, we're following this thread of redemption through the whole Bible. The thread of redemption starts in Genesis chapter 2 and goes all the way through the Bible, all the way to the end of Revelation. And that's the promised Messiah that's going to save the world. And they're going to save the world from what? The SIM virus, the sin virus. That promise is just, that thread of redemption is all through the Bible. And this is being passed from generation to son through the generations. Esau traditionally would have received those, but Esau came back from a hungry day of hunting, and Jacob was having a pot of stew there, and he sells his birthright to Jacob. So Jacob gives him his bowl because Jacob said, I'm not going to give you any of mine. And he goes, well, I'll give you my birthright for it, or be exchanged. So he gets his birthright. He doesn't have his blessing yet. Later on is when the deceptive story of Jacob and his mother, Rebecca, tricking Isaac and putting fur on Jacob and everything so that he would get the blessing also. So anyway, long story short, Jacob gets both the birthright and the blessing, and he fears for his life, so he runs from Esau. He thinks Esau's going to kill him. He gets in Bethel. We get the angels, the dream that he has, the Jacob's ladder of angels descending and ascending from heaven down to in Bethel, God reaffirms, even though Jacob was deceptive and got the blessing and the promise, the birthright and the promise, God reaffirms in this dream to Jacob that I'm choosing you to bring those promises together. So all the promises that he made to Abraham, Isaac, he now makes to Jacob at Bethel.
Why did Rebecca not like the?
Huh?
Why didn't they like Esau? That's what I don't.
Why didn't they like Esau?
Yeah, because no, because Rebecca wanted Jacob.
Well,
Like,
partly yes. So this is a family, dimensions here that are going on here. Jacob or Esau sold his birthright. That's the first mistake. He thought so little of these promises of God. He sold it for a bowl of soup.
I think it's interesting that he put his flesh above God's will, basically, which all goes back to putting your flesh above all through the entire Bible.
Exactly.
Sacrifice your blood.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so it's Jacob. Well, Jacob was deceptive. Esau was so casual with these blessings and promises. He kind of deserved what he got.
You had to assume he's going to get it anyway because he always.
Yeah, don't have to do anything about it.
Yeah, most special. Kind of like the Jews. We're so special. And they are, but not.
So this brings us, because of Jacob's fleeing, his mother Rebecca tells him, "Flee back to my homeland, to Haran. Go back to my family's, to our family." He meets Rachel, the love of his life. He sees Rachel, but Rachel has a brother, and he's over because their father has passed. The brother Laban is over that, and Laban's a lot like Jacob. He's pretty deceptive. So he's working for him, and he's blessing Laban. And Laban says, "Look, you're blessing me. You're doing all this work for me. It's not right that you're my family, and you're not getting something for this. What can I give you?" And he goes, "Well, you're Rachel's hand in marriage, basically." He's okay. You work for me for 7 years, and I'll give you Rachel. That's the deal they made. 7 years goes by. He's blessed them. Laban pulls a trick on Jacob. At the wedding night, Jacob had too much wine. He puts a veil over Leah. Not Leah, Leah. I'm thinking Star Trek. Leah. Leah, and he passes Leah off as Rachel. And when Jacob raises up, he goes, "What the heck? I'm married to Leah now." And basically, Laban says, "Look, we have this tradition in our country. You have to marry the oldest first before we can get to marry the younger." So anyway, the whole deal comes out here. And Laban says, "Look, work for me for 7 more years, and then you can have Rachel." So Jacob does it. Jacob works 14 years to get the love of his life. And he ends up getting the love of his life. Then he ends up, I was going to go through this. And so this is basically, there's this battle that takes place. Jacob's got 2 wives. Leah is basically popping out children. And Rachel is not having, she's barren. And so the flesh again comes into the thing, and she goes, "Here, take my handmaiden and have children through her so that I may have children with you." And so she gives her handmaiden. Well, Leah says, "Well, have none of that, so take my handmaiden too." So Leah's popping out children of her own, and she gives Jacob her handmaiden as well. And these become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now notice the last, number 11 is Joseph, and number 12 is Benjamin. Both of those are natural children from late Rachel, the love of his life. Unfortunately, he played favoritisms with his wife. He clearly, throughout the Bible stories, shows he had a favorite wife, Rachel. And then he plays favorites with his children as well. Joseph was his favorite. He loses Joseph. Rachel later on has Benjamin, and she dies. We'll get in Ben first.
So Papa was born.
And the first.
No kidding.
Yes. Jacob flees Laban's house in the middle of the night. We won't go into this story. Laban chases him and says, "What the heck? You've got my daughters, my grandchildren. Why'd you leave?" They work it all out. Read the whole chapter 31. You'll notice that they work it all out. Have amenable visiting rights, for lack of a better way of wording it. We're 32. Read that as well. That's that Christophany we mentioned earlier. Jacob wrestles with God. God changes Jacob's name from Jacob to Israel. Okay, in this wrestling match. 33. Jacob finally is heading back. Remember, he left Laban's tribe. He was heading back to the Promised Land. he's afraid to meet his brother Esau, but he sends it's a war strategy. It's really interesting. He sends waves of his clans ahead of himself, with gifts for Esau, and it's all Esau has forgotten it all. Esau's been blessed in the land. He doesn't have any animosity to Jacob, so that they reunite and they get together. Gosh, I'm not gonna have time to finish this, guys. Read 34. Dinah, it's a whole mess in Shechem, and it kind of eliminates. Reuben's the oldest. You got Simeon and Levi. Simeon and Levi are natural brothers of her, and they do something horrible. They kill all the men of Shechem, and they use the sign of circumcision to do it, to get their advantage. It's a misuse of God's covenant sign. It's a horrible story. But I don't have time to go much into it. God blesses Jacob. Let's go to. We're not going to look at the genealogy of Esau because he's not in the line anyway. And then we get to Joseph's dream. So basically, let's cover Joseph real fast. And I apologize for this being fast. Joseph is the 11th son of Jacob and his favorite, right? And Jacob shows he's his favorite, and Joseph's not smart enough to play it down. And I mean, all about the coat of many colors, and it's just like a neon sign to the rest of the brothers, just getting.
Daddy loves me best.
Daddy loves me best. And then he has, to make things worse, so you've got that situation all set up. Then Joseph has a dream. He has two dreams, actually. He has a dream of this wheat, and it's bowing down to him. And it's just happened to be the leaven, so it shows his brothers. The interpretation is this wheat's resembling that all his brothers are going to eventually bow down to him, and they know that. And then he has one with the stars, or 11 stars, the sun and the moon, and they all bow down to him. That's the mother, the father, and his brothers. So he's not making friends. He's not influencing his family members there. In fact, he just hardens their hearts. So then you get to the story of them planning to kill him. They're going to kill Joseph. Judah, the fourth son, I could go through the oldest is Reuben. He disqualifies himself for the blessing and the curse because he does something to try to take the tribe over. That's another story. Then you got Simeon and Levi. They did Shechem. They disqualified. Now we get to the fourth son of Jacob, Judah. He ends up being the one where the seed is promised to come through. He's the same person. When the brother's going to kill him, Judah steps up and says, let's not kill him. He's not all bad. Let's throw him in the pit and sell him, then we can make money on him, instead of killing him. So that's where the story, they throw him into the pit, they sell him to, the caravan going off to Egypt. We have the story of Judah and Tamar. Interesting story. I'm not going to go into it. Read it. I will say this, though. The people that are in Jesus's lineage is impressive. Tamar, who passes herself off to be a prostitute in order for Judah to fulfill his contract that promise he made to her. You've got Rahab in Jericho, who hides the slaves. She's a prostitute. These women are in the genealogy of Jesus. Once again, the Bible does not hide any scar. So we know about Joseph. He gets sold to the caravan. He gets taken to Egypt. He ends up in Potiphar's house. Everybody knows the story. Potiphar's wife finds him attractive, makes pass after pass after pass. He rebels again, or he flees from him. She accuses him of raping him. Potiphar can do nothing but throw him into jail. He gets thrown into prison. That's where he meets the cupbearer and the baker. He's interpreting dreams. Everywhere he rises, when he went to Potiphar's house, he rose to be second in command in Potiphar's house. Then Potiphar throws him in prison. He rises to be the second in command of the prison guard. And he's also known for interpreting dreams. He has two people. We tell the story of the baker and the cup maker, and he does the dream. He interprets the cup maker, basically says, the next day you will be restored. They're going to come in and take you and put you back in your position with the Pharaoh. And he goes, remember me when they do that. That's what he told him to do. Well, he didn't remember. And the baker goes, oh, good. Interpret my dream. Well, it's not so good. He goes, he interprets the maker's dream. He goes, tomorrow you will die. And that's the short of the story. I mean, it's more in detail to it. So basically that's the scenario. He's in prison. He's known for who he is. Then Pharaoh has this dream, and Pharaoh's dream is about 7 scrawny cows and 7 things of wheat, and 7 healthy cows and 7 healthy wheat. And no one can interpret it. None of his magicians can interpret it. So that's when the cupbearer goes, hey, I remember there's a guy in prison. So Joseph is called out of prison and he interprets this. And basically, I'm going to wrap this up by saying, Joseph basically says to Pharaoh, look, this is the meaning of your dream. He goes, you're going to have 7 healthy, plentiful years, and then you're going to be followed by 7 years of famine. The 7 years of famine will eat up and use up all of your 7 years of plentiful. And he goes, so what you need to do is you need to appoint a very wise person to manage the 7 years of plenty, so when the 7-year famine coming, you will house plenty of food during the famine. And Pharaoh says, it seems like you're the wisest guy in the room. You do that. That's where Joseph rises immediately out of prison to be the top of Pharaoh's. And Pharaoh has him managing that. And he ends up saving both Israel, because there's a famine in the land. What does Israel do? Israel comes over to Egypt. And who's in charge in Egypt? Joseph is. So he recognizes his brothers. His brothers don't recognize him. There's a number of different stories in there. He places them all in order of their age at the dinner. That's kind of a thing. They're shocked. How did he know our ages? He didn't. And then he sets them up at the trap. He wants to see, do they deserve to be saved? Had they changed since they sold me into slavery? He hides a cup in Benjamin's, his brother's, I think, chasel. And then they go out, and then he sends his army after him and says, you guys have stolen from us. And they, no, we didn't. And they searched, they did. And the end of it is, he realizes that they had changed, because when he says the penalty that was going to fall on Benjamin, and you have to understand the relationship now with Benjamin and his father Jacob, because Jacob thinks Joseph is dead, and Benjamin's the only son from Rachel he has left, and it's a really tight bond. But Judah steps up, the same one, the 4th son, that saved him from death in the pit and sold him and commits him to stone there. He saves now. He says, no, don't do to Benjamin whatever you can do to Benjamin, do to me. And he stepped up in this place. And Joseph's heart was broken, realized his brothers have changed, and their attitude and their love for their father, because it's a longer story, that the love for their father and everything. And he breaks down, tells them who he is, and they're all shocked. And so Jacob sends them back to get Jacob and his whole family, and they all come to Egypt, and Joseph gives them the best land in Egypt. And they said, that's where we're going to start next week in Exodus. They're all sitting there, and they're going to populate and be blessed. That's where we are at the end of chapter 50 of Genesis. I apologize.
Good job.
It was a lot.